Construction. This is the main topic today. We dip our toes into this underperforming sector and what can be done to make it more successful. Hi, Rob here from the Better SMB team. We invited John Sinclair from Performance to help us with this conversation. We look mainly at technology, but as usual, we drift around a bit to explore all the challenges in this sector. There are lots to take on board, even if you don't build things. So pen out, make some notes. It is a ripper of an episode. But just before the episode begins, the usual supporting plugs. Please, I'm begging you, press the like button, follow us, recommend us. We are coming up to 40 episodes now, and all the support really does help us grow and continue the conversations. Now, finally, our wonderful sponsors from SetSeed. If you ever want a flash, all-in-one customer experience platform, Chris and the team at SetSeed are your go-to people. So head over to setseed.com. They are awesome. So awesome, I'm even putting my business through their development team. Anyway, that's enough messages from me. Let's listen to John and talk about construction and data. On with the show.
Welcome back to the Better SMB, where we're on a mission to lift New Zealand's productivity by helping small and medium business leaders take practical steps to improve their business performance, starting today. I'm David Altiner.
And I'm Rob Bull.
We've created this platform to spark a movement. Our BHAG is to get 100,000 businesses, that includes 15,000 manufacturers, on a journey of continuous improvement. Through the podcast, our monthly column, The Last Word, a New Zealand manufacturer, and our growing community, we're building a trusted voice for SMB leaders, offering the inspiration, insight, and implementation support they need to build high-performing, future-ready businesses. Today, we're turning our attention to an industry that shapes our skylines and landscapes. It brings together the tapestry of our cities and communities we live in, builds the places we work, the homes we live in, the schools our kids learn in, and the hospitals we rely on when life takes an unexpected turn. Construction isn't just concrete, steel, and timber. It's one of New Zealand's economic powerhouses. According to MB, it contributes approximately 7 to 10% of our national GDP, employs about 200,000 people across the country, and underpins our ability to operate businesses, attract talent, and grow thriving regions. Without construction, nothing else, from tourism to tech to transport, has a foundation to stand on. For all its importance, construction also carries a quieter story, one that sits behind the buildings we see, hidden in the digital shadows. Projects generate thousands of documents, drawings, specifications, decisions, emails, photos, and models. But once the ribbon is cut, so much of that intelligence is either lost, scattered, or simply never used again. It becomes a digital wasteland, despite being one of the richest sources of insight the industry has. And that's where today's guest comes in. Joining us is John Sinclair, Digital Services Director at Performance Building Technologies, a company working to help the construction sector lift productivity by unlocking the unseen value buried in project data. They're helping innovators, owners, and contractors move from chaos to clarity, creating something John calls an asset memory, a shared searchable brain that carries the story of a building long after the project team has packed up and gone home. Just like the foundations of any building, the most important parts of construction are often the parts you can't see. John and the team at Performance are giving the industry the tools to build digital foundations that are as strong as the physical ones. Today, we're going to explore the current reality, the future opportunity, and the practical steps that construction businesses, large, small, or somewhere in between, can take to get ahead. Let's get into it. John, welcome to the Better SMB.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Rob. What an intro. Set us up for a good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we met in the IT integrator landscape. What headed you towards construction? It's a fascinating industry.
It's interesting. Yeah, well, I had pause to reflect on my career so far, and I not many people know that before I went into IT, I was an environmental scientist. So I trained in ecology and ecosystems, and worked in the architecture, engineering, construction sector for the first kind of 3 or 4 years of my career, doing resource management, consents, and other pieces. So I kind of started in that industry, and then took a kind of hard left. And when I moved to London and went into technology and IT, and started as a developer, and then moved into kind of systems managed services when I got back to New Zealand 6 years later. And the work I did in managed services was all basically within the construction, manufacturing, heavy asset sectors. So I've been kind of in the sector since the beginning. And so when the opportunity came to move out of the tech world and focus on the tech of construction, it was a pretty attractive kind of proposition, and not just because I think there's a massive change coming and needed, but also because it is a great opportunity to leave a legacy for the next generation. Like, I've got kids, and I actually feel pretty strongly about leaving the world in a better place, and construction is a great way to do that.
So in the intro, I touched on the data that sits behind the construction space. Talk to me about the data environment on a typical project and what it looks like today, well, maybe yesterday, because I know that you're starting to engage with businesses already and start to change this. So yeah, how chaotic is it out there?
How long have we got? This is an area that I think I'm really passionate about, how we change the world for better in this space. So most projects are cyclical, so they stand up and close down to match the construction cycle. And when you stand up a project, there is literally thousands of documents that come with it. So I was dealing with someone the other day, and they were struggling with one of the specifications they have, an architectural specification, 3,500 pages long as a PDF, and within that there will be scattered throughout that whole document a range of deliverables and the requirements that they have to meet. So as a part of building that project, and that's one of many specifications. There'll be tens of thousands of pages of specification, and that's all really important information. But for the human, it is almost might as well not exist. Like, it's so hard to digest. And I think that's one of the kind of huge opportunities that arise with technology that's able to process the written word or drawings or information, being able to digest massive volumes of information and create sense out of it, and in a way that people can then build. So I think that kind of change of information is going to lead to much better project outcomes. A lot in the sector at the moment, like people struggling to make things work just because of the sheer volume of information. When you think about what happens to that information past the project, most projects have a curated list of information that goes out as a handover pack. Some that goes into an asset management system or a CMMS, computer management system, and the rest of it gets put on a USB stick or is buried in 10 folders deep in a SharePoint folder, never to be found again. So you kind of have this massive cliff, this loss of information, valuable information, drawings, specifications, warranties, manuals, everything. Unless it gets made into the curated cut, most of it gets lost. Rambled on about there, but this is such an important space in the way that information's handled.
I'll drop in here on this one because timely around this whole topic, right? Because last week the Infrastructure Commission released one of their more recent reports, and the stat that David and I have talked about, and we've shared it on this podcast before, which is in New Zealand we've got one of the highest spends in infrastructure, but also the lowest outcome.
Yep.
So the value for money, aka our productivity. I was in Wellington, or the Greater Wellington area last week, talking to about 50 or 60 professionals in a very significant infrastructure project, and I shared with them a stat. Be really interested with your thoughts on this, but construction professionals spend about 35% of their time on non-optimal tasks. So the lean world of me, that's called non-valued work,
Yep.
aka dumb stuff. Does that tie in with what you're seeing?
Yeah, 100%, Rob. So working with a project team in the last couple of weeks, they had to try and extract all the deliverables out of those specification documents. And, typically that would take 2, 3, 4 weeks of time, someone going through those documentation, cut and pasting. We built a custom prompt and used a custom AI tool and extracted all of those, and it took us about an hour and a half. And what we found was where they'd done it, back testing the ones they'd done manually, it was the manual one was about 45% accurate, and we got extras out that they hadn't picked up. So I think there is so much, and this is simple stuff, like with modern tools, but most people don't understand it exists or it's possible. And another example, similar project, they've got 1,000 PDF drawings to compare between 100% developed design and 100% detailed design. So 1,000 drawings to compare. That's someone playing Where's Waldo 1,000 times. That allowed 2-person months to do it. None of that is useful time that adds value to a project. So it is absolutely rife. That's Infrastructure Commission finding always the stat in that which really sits with me and has for years is we're in the bottom 10% of the value we get out of that investment spend. So we spend a lot and we get poor results out the back end of it, which that kind of what's that, Einstein's definition of insanity, like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. That's kind of where I think we are in the space.
Yeah, David knows a guy that I often quote, guru around operational excellence and quality, and W. Edwards Deming, and he was floating around in the 70s and 80s. And he described, or one of his quotes is, each system is designed to give you exactly what you're getting today. And that's pretty much what we got, right? And so we shouldn't be surprised with this and with the poor outcomes.
Yeah, I think you're right. We shouldn't be surprised about what's happening and that the outcomes are poor. I think my frustration in that is the way the continuation, like people think that the continuation of the status quo is the way that we're going to improve.
Yep, and that was, we were lucky enough last week to facilitate a whole stakeholder event with this large infrastructure, multi-billion-dollar project, and we were lucky enough to facilitate through that and we were asked to challenge the normal thinking of this group, and those were the conversations we were starting to poke, around even the sharing of data. So I like that one because particularly with larger construction, got all the subgroups and companies, one person might hold a lot quite critical data, but the lack of trust and sharing across for the greater good of that project. And I can tell you all the stats related to all of that. It's still crazy how we still think in that siloed thing and power is knowledge, and it's like, just get off your high horse and just be a good person.
Give it up. Yeah. I think part of it comes down to changing the buyer's understanding of what data is about, because it has fundamentally changed. Like in the last couple of years since the rise of generative AI, like it is shifting the value of data monumentally. So the way I like to talk about it is, if you're building something, you're essentially building two assets. You're building a physical asset, which is the road or the bridge or the hospital, and you're building a digital asset. You've got to nurture both of them all the way through the project, and both of those assets have value through the life of the project. The physical asset is used for whatever use you wanted, but the digital asset is it actually compounds in value over time, because the project, once it's finished, shuts down, people forget about it, go and do their own thing. And there's so many stats around the cost of maintenance and the cost of unavailability. And those things directly relate back to what information you have.
I'm curious, John, when you're looking at projects, where do you see the biggest performance losses occurring due to missing or inaccessible data? And before you even answer that, is it during or after the project where those are most problematic?
Yeah, I think, if we're talking about the biggest problem in a macro sense, I think and this doesn't affect the performance of construction. I think it's the exit of construction into ongoing life. That's where the biggest gap exists. And that's because during a construction project, there are a bunch of people who actively care about that information because they have to be across it to build something and complete it. Once it's complete, often the operational teams haven't had a hand in designing what information they get, and they get a handover pack that's been defined for them. Often models and information don't match up with their asset management systems, and all that rich information gets put on a USB stick or put on a SharePoint drive and never be seen again. So I think, in my mind, if you thought about that moment, that kind of handover moment, as a critical phase of a project versus we're done, let's close it out and move on to the next thing. I think we'd actually get some, it's kind of, for me, that's kind of the theory of constraints. So what's the one thing you have to change in a system for it to unlock value further on? And I think it's that pinch point that comes between construction and operations.
Yeah, because you go from building the asset to then operating the asset, and we kind of treat it, like you say, as here's your groomed information, versus here's all the information, now carry on using it. So some stuff from the research I did on the productivity problem in New Zealand. It costs us 50% more to build infrastructure than the US, 300% more than Australia, and as high as 900% more than countries like Portugal, South Korea, Spain, and Finland. And that's just building it, let alone operating it.
Yeah. Wow, that's some pretty confronting stats.
And so those are from 2023. Even if they're half wrong, we still suck.
Yeah.
Pretty much, right? So some of the things there were also regulatory and compliance friction and those types of things. How do you see that versus, I guess at the point you're dealing with something, it's been consented, it's made its way through, you're sort of somewhat through that regulatory and compliance piece to then start quoting, building, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, the regulatory compliance piece is critical. I mean, there's no getting around having those kind of consenting elements. Can it be quicker? I would have thought absolutely. You see some of the changes coming through around seismic requirements, which are quite specific in New Zealand. I think that would probably be part of the dealing with seismic issues would be part of the building cost escalation in New Zealand. The regulational piece isn't. I'm not as close to it as others. I mean, we see a lot of, we talk about this over specification. A lot of that is people protecting themselves through the construction project game. So I can think that kind of element of protecting liabilities is a game that most parties play. They will try and hide things into and mountain documentation to try and protect their liability position. Probably runs through into councils as well, who for the longest period have been kind of last one standing in any of these projects that fail and have to pick up the tab. So I think that has kind of flowed all the way through over time.
So the construction sector is really quite fragmented. How does that also play into this whole data problem and these inefficiencies that we're effectively creating for ourselves?
Well, I think what was like with the stats, like 65,000 companies under $1 million turnover in the construction sector for New Zealand, something along those lines. So you're right, there's a massive number of man and van doing work on sites. I think there's a real risk in this, especially as they get into bigger projects. There's a real risk around people not understanding what they're signing up to in a small business perspective. A lot of main contractors who will bring in a subcontractor, a smaller business, will push the specifications and requirements for that wholly down to the subcontractor. So understanding what you're signing up for in the subcontractor world is pretty critical, because pretty unforgiving these organizations around this meeting deliverables and meeting expectations. I think the interesting thing in that space is also small organizations can be more nimble in the way they deal with information. The simplest thing a small business in the construction sector could do would be just capture everything that you do on phones or anything. Well, I think the iPhone 12 Pro and above has a LiDAR camera on it, which is just a laser sensor. You can use an app and capture all the work you do. I reckon it's probably one of the smallest and simplest ways for any organization to deal with information as it flows through them and the risk of it. Capture your work visually.
Rock around and video some stuff at the start and the end of the day, that sort of thing.
100%. There's like simple apps. I think Polycam is one I saw look before. It's just put on your phone, walk around, capture what you've done, video and LiDAR. It's going to really change. I think it's going to accelerate. It's going to accelerate in the construction sense and data and how it's used. Small organizations, or any organization, is going to be required to be digitally savvy in the way they interact with it.
Well, I guess real life situation from my side of things. We pulled together an outdoor cabin. And when we had it up and just before lining it, I just rocked around and took some photos of each of the walls, so I knew where the different nogs were and all that sort of thing. So later on, when I had to stick a hole saw through the wall so I could put an air vent in, that was actually super useful, because then I could see where everything was, where the wires were, make sure I didn't decide to drill through a live power cable or nothing like that, right?
Well, you think about that at scale. You think about that issue at scale. So I heard like a briefing from, there was a Health New Zealand guy briefing, so at a public briefing, and he said they have a problem. Any hospital they go into don't know what's behind the wall, and so any project they take on takes longer because they have to take off more of the wall they have to do, which means the part of the hospital that's being worked on is out of action for a longer period of time. Like it kind of snowballs through in the way that this information kind of can be used. I think I was going to add in there is we did a study on the cost versus the benefit. And so for a main contractor, when they did these using captures, so like they're capturing the whole site, it's not just their work, they got a $1 to $8 return. So for the $1 they spent on it, they got $8 back through mainly avoided claims. They're just able to handle disputes way quicker. They're able to prove progress super quick, all that kind of things that you want to do on a high performance project site. It kind of starts with that visual record in my mind.
Just really interesting, and I'll move it slightly away from data, because that's you and David's. Like, I use data, but in the work that we do, it tends to fall down to something a little bit more simplistic, and that's around communication and collaboration. And the environment and what you've been describing blows me away, but actually doesn't at the same time, in terms of I'm hearing almost gotcha politics going on from big providers to small contractors and all of that, and everyone's running around protecting their back rather than going, right, we're all in this game, we've got a building to put up or a couple of more k's of road to put in, this is the goal, how can we help each other? And that goes from data sharing, it goes from communication. And this is why I see a stat of 48% of rework in a construction project is due to poor data and communication sharing. The stats that David shared, and it frustrates me that this is still going on.
Yeah, well, I think the rework thing is really interesting, and I think you're right, that collaboration. I'm not deep into some of the procurement models that go on, but I think some of it relates back to how things are procured and the risks and liabilities that sit with different parties as they go through these projects. Because certainly you see that cases of organisations kind of acting in their own best interest at the detriment of the wider project seems kind of ingrained in many ways. In the aspect of rework is such an interesting concept. Such a interesting is maybe not the right word. It's kind of, again, one of those choke points. If you could figure out how to do less rework, so many things benefit. Because one of the things that blew me away when I first joined the construction sector was, one of the experienced construction managers said, you realise that 70% of health and safety incidents happen in rework. I was like, what? Because everyone is building a project is only ever priced to do it once. So if they have to do it again, do anything again, they're under time and cost pressure, and that's when accidents happen. I was like, that kind of, it felt like, to me, that was like a mic drop moment, like, holy, if we actually figured out how to deal with rework, we would save time and cost, and would save people's lives.
100%. I mean, and actually rework isn't difficult if we slow down to find it, fix it, and carry on. I actually met someone who was involved or on the periphery involved in a project with Kainarora. They were getting their house builds down to 60 days from consent through to build.
Yes.
They worked hard. They invested a lot of money up front to get that system right. And it was all based on the last planner, which is a lean-based system, innovated over the States and all that. The only organisation I've heard that's used it effectively, and that team has now been disbanded. That whole system has now been disbanded. So we almost had a working model, dare I say it, based from within a government agency, yet talking about lost knowledge, that's gone.
Yeah, it's gone, yeah.
And it was able to demonstrate that you can reduce that rework.
I think some of that knowledge has gone off to the Simplicity Living guys, and they have done something a little bit similar in the way. They have got broken down the construction. They're building a series of long-term rental properties in Auckland, and they have the backing of the Simplicity KiwiSaver Fund, super fund. And so they have building these and they have done really well. I think some of that knowledge, has gone into that Simplicity Living team around how to kind of make it a manufactured pipeline rather than everyone is a hand rolled snowflake. Which I think you get a lot of that snowflake kind of redesign the same roof flashing, redesign the same thing because you're on the clock and you want to just keep billing your hours.
So I think this is a good segue. I mean, we're talking about lost knowledge, firstly, from the systemic perspective, where we, the taxpayer, have paid to pull something together under Kainga Ora, and now that's lost. Great that it's been picked up by Simplicity, potentially. If we think about this asset memory, why is it a game changer?
Well, I think if you think about how asset information is managed or has evolved over the last couple of decades, it has evolved as structured systems. Work order tabular systems that take through a subset of information that you're interested in. The game changer for me, or the kind of light bulb moment, is AI can look over massive volumes of data. You don't need to curate anything anymore. You actually just need to take it all through. You need to maintain it all. So to give you an example, I was a client who's manages a large facility rang me and said, "Oh, you've seen in the news. There's this evolving story about asbestos in fire doors." And he's like, "Well, I want to know which of the fire doors in my building might have are any of them in that door set that came out of this thing that had asbestos in it, because of the people who put the door hardware on have been drilling into asbestos. That's something I need to deal with." And I was like, he's got the top of the line asset management system. Like, where is all the information? Well, that information sits outside of what was considered important going into an asset management system. So in my mind, you end up with this, rather than trying to curate that subset of information, you start with everything and you use specialist AI brain to filter out what you need and answer questions what you need. So that's kind of where we got to with asset memory. So we've kind of built it in 4 layers. One is protect the knowledge, find a way to hand over everything in a digital form, take it all. You don't need to curate it. You take it all, tweak it all across. I mean, it relies on accuracy. Still need to spend time doing getting things in right that are accurate. So take it all through. And then the second thing we did was we built expertise that was specific to construction and asset sector. So that's a small language model that has been trained on New Zealand building code, New Zealand trained on the construction sector and asset sectors. We put into a large language model, MEP. MEP is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, is also a member of European Parliament, and I'm sure there's many other MEP style abbreviations out there. But that this thing is like we built a really tight expertise around the work that we're doing in construction. From that, I see the pathway is to build an agent. You build a specialist agent that says, tell me the compliance thing, or there is new things coming out, and tell me if I'm exposed to it. The seismic laws have changed. The building code has changed. What's the implication for my building? And that kind of becomes a memory that goes along with the organisation forever.
So that's interesting. I've started talking around AI in a practical sense where a lot of organizations aren't set up to use AI. And what you're talking about there is really cool because I think of it in 3 different layers. The first is your strategic foundations. So if we touch on what that is in this case, hey, we're going to digitally record everything. We're going to capture everything and we're going to make it available to the asset memory.
Yeah.
That's our intent. The next bit is actually doing that. So that's systemizing your execution. So pulling everything in so you produce data so then you can innovate and accelerate. And that's where your AI comes in. Now, as you mentioned, all your language models and all that sort of thing, they know too much. So tell me about my MEP and from all my quotes and so forth. It's like, hey, no worries. You've got no members of the European Parliament. You're good to go. As opposed to what you actually need to know. So then being able to apply those specialized skills. The challenge most businesses have is they don't have the intent, they don't have the systemization. Now they're just using AI to write a better email in the tone of Donald Trump, right? So you've kind of
this matter. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, did I mean 10%, 15%? Oh, I'm not sure. We'll just make it a clear 20. But that's really cool. You've touched on a couple of examples of questions that someone would ask an asset memory. What are a couple of others that would take hours or weeks? You're 5 years on, you're operating this building, something comes up.
Yeah.
And if we take that Health NZ example, what are some examples that could take days, months, weeks?
What's behind the wall in Ward 3, who put in the system that manages the water quality? What's the warranty conditions on the lighting we put in, specialist lighting? Who supplied it? How do we find more of it? Like you look at that, the stats again. The stats are that people spend about 30% of their time just looking for information like this. So it's all. I think about it all. It's all the edge cases. Like if someone says, "Oh, when do I replace the fan on my HVAC system?" It's probably in an asset management system, and it's probably got a time on it. It's going to 250,000 rotations. It's going to be replaced, or whatever the number is. But if someone says, "Oh, what's the registered occupancy for this building so that we're going to change the use of it?" How do I find out that? Well, you probably find it's in the council record somewhere. So either going to the council and digging through their records, or you're into that kind of treasure hunt, trying to find it in physical files. So I mean, that kind of stuff is rife. I also hear a lot about people just having everything on physical plans. Like I talked to a consultant and he said they delivered a pallet load of documentation, like a literal pallet load of documentation. And that documentation, I don't know where that goes. And it sounds like a good firelighter to me, like it's going to be turned into compost somewhere, but it's who looks at that stuff? To me, it's the heart of this inefficiency that permeates the industry, because we rely on this kind of transmission of paper documents and 2D plans and massive specifications that nobody can really interact with. It's there, but they would have a sense of comfort that it exists, but actually doesn't provide any real value.
So you put a really cool story out on LinkedIn. Well, cool if you're the owner of a property, not so cool if you're the tenant of this property.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested for you to talk about that and how engaging with the owner of a existing property resulted in them being able to significantly increase their revenue, but then, because it's a commercial property, significantly increase the value of that property as well. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so I think the story about going to a commercial owner who had had their property that was rented, and they had brought the size of it and the GFA, the leaseable area, had come through from an agent, had come through from a plan, come through from somewhere, but nobody had ever checked it. We went in with a visual tool and we were able to give them an accurate plan within a couple of hours. This is your gross floor area. It was 20% larger than what they had leased it for. To me, it raises 2 really interesting points. One is trusting existing information is not necessarily the smartest move, and there is a bit of that go trust and verify yourself. And the other side is the power of visually based information is going exponential at the moment. So the ability to turn an existing building into a floor plan used to be someone come in with a big device to go through and measure it, and take data, scan it, and then they would or measure it, and then they would go back and draw a plan up, and that would quite involve exercise. Now there are apps where you can do it yourself. You can walk through and create a floor plan as fast as it takes you to walk around the building. So it just feels like that the use of digital information, visual information, is going to be really, really powerful in the next little while. And that's just one use case. Like the use of that to verify the floor area of one building is one. There's heaps of other use cases in that visual space. And I think that's going to be any organisation just capturing evidence in a visual form. I do think it raises an interesting question. Someone raised a question around how do you verify that information is correct? If somebody hasn't chucked a video into Nana Banana and said, show this as being more complete, so there will be a question around that information being spoofed. But
we had a scenario with our house when we were building it where when roof on, there's a progress payment.
Yeah.
We got sent a photo with the roof on, made the progress payment. My mother drove past our property at the end of that day, and she was like, why are there tiles missing from the front of your garage? And it turns out that the contractor had run out of tiles, put the tiles up to take the photo, moved the tiles away so that the tiles that had to be replaced were closest to the front when the new tiles showed up. And I mean, that was just a residential house build. So I'm sure that behavior kind of happens all over the show. Sure. Now that was 10 years ago, pre-AI. So what you're talking about is a significant risk.
Yeah, well, I think that comes back to the construction monitoring and what people do to manage that risk and needing just being able to verify themselves. We get to see quite a few people doing the capture as part of that verification construction monitoring process, independent of the person actually doing the work.
But that goes back down to the maturity of this whole sector. Is again going back to that gotcha politics almost, and it's just like, if things weren't working, and we shouldn't be hiding this or doing these little tricks and pieces. If things are going okay, talk about it and learn from it. If they're not going okay, own up to it and deal with it.
I see people kind of being afraid of the data, and trying to hide information and have silos and keep it to themselves. I think there is an element of that transparency is going to have to come at some point. And again, I think it comes from educated clients around how they can the value of the data they're paying for, but not really getting the benefit from long run. I think about it as as one of those kind of shockwaves that will go through the industry at some point. And I say this a lot to the construction company Southbase that I work very closely with. In that the organisation as a constructor who solves this problem about how to use data well will have an unfair advantage for quite a period of time, and because they'll be able to achieve margins and rates and progress than they'll be asked for, and that will shift the market. I think the same will happen for everyone else in the industry. They will eventually figure out how to shift, use data, and the ones that do and get onto it quickly will shift the market.
Yeah, because the competitive advantages are the ones who actually go take notice and take on board and the feedback from the Infrastructure Commission, as an example, and go, holy crap. The first ones out of the blocks who actually sit down, re-engineer their whole value stream of the business from, it's not even from, beginning to build, but, when there's an idea of something needs to be constructed, from that part of the value chain right through to handing over the keys and afterwards the maintenance and all of that kind of stuff. It's the first person who really unpacks every little ounce, and we've shared a couple of ideas of how to do that. That's data, that's communication, that's planning, that's that whole transparency. Even examples when I've worked with construction and civil construction firms, they turn up to site because they've been told to be there at 9 o'clock, but even the foreman's not there till 10:30. Now, creating those standards and just hitting them and maintaining them and just having the ability to set and keep honest to all of that, the first organisation who nails that, they'll be unbreakable in terms of
Yeah.
being able to compete, because no one could compete. Because when you're decreasing that rework and all of that kind of stuff, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. And when construction is a small margin business, 6 to 8% maybe, if you're lucky. If you can create a 5-10% improvement in that through technology and the way you use data, you'll be able to set the price on lots of things and still be profitable, and it'll change so much in my mind anyway.
100%. I'm right behind it. If you can do 5 to 10% improvements just through data and sharing knowledge and all the stuff that you're doing, I often walk into, say, manufacturing businesses and say, from scratch, we can save 20 to 30% in terms of productivity. Construction, I'm quite happy to throw out 30%.
Yeah.
It might take it a year to 2 years to achieve that, but that's nothing in that sector.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 50% between the two of us.
Yeah. It's gonna make it happen, Rob. It sounds like a great mission to be on. 'Cause I think that's what will get people's attention, shift the dial completely around how this stuff works. Which is why, I mean, the Infrastructure Commission 30-year plan was a little bit disappointing for me in that they didn't really give any consideration to the information that they were going to create, how they would use information. I did provide feedback on the original one. I haven't gone back and reread it, but I doubt they would change much. 30 years is a long time, eh? Like, when I started 30 years ago, when I started my career, I was using a Motorola Ultra Sleek. They had a half an hour battery life, and we had one computer in the office for like 200 people that was connected to the internet. And it's just kind of, I don't know what it's going to be like in another 30 years, but it's going to be way more digital than it is today. And that should be part of our thinking.
You can't make plans for 30 years, certainly not anymore. I remember being part of the health sector, and we had to write 10 to 20-year strategies. And it's always good to have some vision and some population growth stats and where we have to be. But your plan really has to be 2 to 3 years max.
Yeah. Well, I quite like. The intention of a 30-year plan is we've got a pipeline of projects that we need to get done. But the way we do those projects, you're right. You should be thinking about that in a 2 to 3 year maximum, time frame. And that I struggle with that one anyway.
So while you've both been talking about world domination, let's just step a little bit back from that. What would New Zealand look like for the owners of these assets, contractors, subbies, etc., if your asset memory approach, John, just became standard across 20% of projects? What would that look like?
So if 20% of the projects we're using, I think the difference will be how much time, how much money, how much availability their asset has over the lifetime. Organisations being able to manage more buildings, that resulting in better availability, so they've been able to do its job. I dealt with one client where they openly said that they had lost, when they sold some of their assets, they took a 10 to 15% haircut on the value of those assets and the sale price because they didn't have the information that went with it. What they did. That's what I try and get people's attention with, is like, it is not something that you're going to, not from day one that it's going to be magic. It's going to make a massive difference. But if you have the information, you will get value from it all the way through the life of that building or the asset or whatever it is. It could be, we've had talks to people who build like the super yachts. Super yachts are, funny enough, the same thing. Like, all the money in the world, and it's still got the same problem with how they maintain those big assets, super yacht assets. So yeah, it is 20% of built assets in New Zealand doing that. I think we'd be well on the way to setting a bit of a groundswell for things to be able to work differently, and that differently being based on automation, based on good information, based on a brighter kind of brighter future.
So we'd probably have a bunch of people going, what are those 20% of people doing differently? I want to be like them. So now, if we take, and I'll steal Rob's words here, at 7:30 Tuesday morning, someone's coming along, it's just their next day at work, they're on a construction project, there's 10 to 20 people in their business. What's the simplest first step they can take to start lifting their data maturity?
Well, the first thing I would suggest is going into that visual record, like just being able to this is what we did today. This is the visual record of it. Just that simple move will make a massive difference. Because when it comes to variations, when it comes to rework, when it comes to he said, she said, this is what happened. If you have a visual record of it, it becomes way, way easier. And then the other thing I'll do is just generically using AI to understand the specifications that you're signing up for. I think there's a fair bit of chivalry writism going on where job, and that's understandable in a tight economy where people just want to win it, but people need to be aware of what they're signing up for, because often those specifications can be really onerous. And the third thing I would do is think about how you hand over the information. Most subcontractors, there's a retention on the information that they have to provide as an output of their works. So they'll have certain information they have to provide, and the main contractor will hold back payment parts of that. So that could well be the profit margin of many organizations that get held back because the digital information isn't provided. And I think getting smart around gathering information and handing it over in a way which is simple and searchable makes a lot of sense.
So what would a simple subcontractor performance dashboard look like, do you think?
Good question.
Well, that's a good question. So I think it's simple. So we've been doing a bit of this question around what does performance look like on a job site. And so the simple ones, how many people are on site on the day? How many people do you have on site? How many people do you plan to have on site? What progress you're expected to create, and where you're at actually. So those kind of four things: inputs and outputs. How much input have I created, you needed, and how much output have I generated, and where does that sit in relation to the plan I've signed up for? And so again, we've done that. The visual tools, go through the getting so powerful now they can measure how much progress has been achieved. And a lot of the main contractors are looking at it as well. So as a subcontractor, you may not need to have that specific yourself, but being able to track what have I done on the site, what have I achieved is probably the simplest measure of it, I think, with the boundaries of health and safety and quality kind of going around that.
Now, I've spent a bit of time mucking around with AI, and I've gone down a few rabbit holes, possibly a little bit of ADHD there or something. But how do you avoid going too far and overcomplicating this if you're that small 5, 10, 20 person business?
Well, if you're that small 5, 10, 20 person business, it's actually never been more democratized. Like, it's never been easier for you to, as a small business, to gain access to incredible power. I think it's worth understanding, for me anyway, that it's not like a cul-de-sac, process. It's like, you don't just give AI something and expect it to go through and deliver it, and that's the end of it. It's a roundabout. I don't know why I got the traffic analogy, but like the best success I've had in this space is a bit of knowledge, some expertise, and a job to be done, and you go through on that process with AI at the center, and you kind of iterate, and you can get incredibly powerful, incredibly quick.
I like it. Now, so we've threatened you with the wrap-up questions.
Yes.
That Rob's going to be asking you. Now, unless you've had a bit of a listen, these will be a bit of a surprise, but I think they're fairly standard and fairly straightforward. Nothing a man of your caliber won't be able to smack out of the park.
Well, so, Rob, you've just set the expectation high, haven't you?
Are you ready there, John?
Always ready, Rob. Born ready.
Brilliant. The first one, slightly serious, but the best book that you've read that you would recommend to another SMB owner?
The best book that I've read to another SMB owner. Can I chuck two in? Non-fiction and fiction? Non-fiction book, I would read The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan, Zeihan, Zeihan. And that's the end of globalization. And I think every business owner should think about that in terms of what that, and you see it playing out. It was published a few years ago. You see it playing out in the world around us. But just understand the implications to your business, because the world that we know from the past is not going to be the world that we know in the future. The second book I would read is called The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver. And The Mandibles it tells a story of the collapse of the US economy in 2028 and this family, the Mandibles, as they deal with this kind of dystopian world. And again, I don't mean to have US derangement syndrome, but I read it before. It all went sideways with the current US administration, and I just think it was a fascinating read because some of the stuff is kind of playing. It seems very, very real at the moment. So yeah, understand the world around you.
Excellent. Right. I might dig out certainly the first one for my project 26 this year, which is to read 26 books over the year. Nice. Okay, what's a hobby that you're weirdly competitive about?
I'm weirdly competitive about. I'm a cook and a baker, and I love cooking. I'm a 50% of the population that follows recipes, and so I'm kind of weirdly competitive around the quality of what I put out. And what I do at the moment is I bake sourdough bread. Like I've got right down the sourdough rabbit hole, and I bake. I think this weekend I've made 2 loaves of bread. I've made a batch of sourdough pita bread, and I've made sourdough waffles, and I made sourdough pizza on Friday night. Like I'm weirdly competitive around sourdough.
And as soon as you said baking, I knew sourdough was going to come up. Excellent. Excellent. Right, now you are from the Big 09 and around Grey Lynn, as we talked about before we came on here. I always love to support our hospitality sector because they need it as much as anyone. Best coffee hangout in the Grey Lynn, Parnell area.
In Grey Lynn, there's a place called Honeybones. It's a really, really good. I'm not a coffee drinker, but they do a great. Everything they put out is fabulous. So yeah, Honeybones is a good one to go for.
Brilliant.
Right. Do a great kind of scrambled eggs in the morning. Very good. That's your thing. So
excellent for a good brunch. Brilliant. Excellent. So for those listeners, if you are in the Auckland area, head that out. Nice and central. Fantastic.
All right.
Excellent.
If you're in the construction industry today, remember you're now building 2 assets, the physical one that everyone sees and the digital one most people ignore. The physical asset keeps the lights on, but the digital asset decides how safely, how efficiently, and how profitably it runs over the next 30 years. The opportunity for New Zealand isn't just to spend more on infrastructure, it's to remember what we've already built. Start small, capture what you do, understand what you're signing up for, and think about how you hand information over. The organisations that treat data as an asset, not an afterthought, will be the ones that beat the productivity stats and set a new benchmark for the industry. John, thanks for helping us rethink construction, not just as concrete and steel, but as a long-term memory problem we can actually solve. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity to chat to you guys.